Hi, Scott.
Hi, Dan.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I am well. Hoping a few more people will join me to restart this. Hey, Mike. Started sharing my screen here. How's life post Intel, Dan?
Pretty relaxed so far.
I'm curious how Intel's current market position, for lack of better term, impacts confidential computing efforts. It's really hard to know from the outside.
Yeah, I could probably speculate, but I wouldn't have much to base it on.
Mm. I mean, with SGX, they were sort of the pioneer of this. I mean, like, but I don't know what's happening now. Okay. So, all right, just sounds like there may be three of us unless somebody else joins. I also have to say I'm actually not going to be here 2 weeks from now. I'm taking my remaining week of vacation before the weather starts to suck. So, um, but starting September, as I said, there will be no more time off for me. So I'll be here all the time. Now, what I wanted to do today is I wanted to do a quick recap of our 25 goals to see, sort of check where we are. And I want to understand what it is that we're going to be doing for the rest of the year, what it is we're going to be reporting to the TAC at the end of the year, considering where we are. And also, there was a fairly significant milestone, I think, for us was getting the first 3 governance patterns published. I can tell you that the teams that are JP Morgan starting to adopt confidential computing. We now have a couple of scenarios that we are doing. I believe at least one of them is with AWS Nitro, but turns out that the governance patterns were written in a way that encompasses AWS, even if they don't recognize the consortium. But there is no difference actually.
Well,
We're very
they recognise the consortium. It's just that what they do doesn't meet our definition of CC, so they haven't joined. So
yeah.
not they don't recognise it, but
I guess what I wanted to so stress is from the point of view of my employer. We're in the risk business, accepting risk business, and it appears to be sufficient for certainly an improvement over what we have. So some like putting key operations into Nitro Enclave helps. But what I am having these teams do now is take these governance patterns and basically assess how they are going to report on the control state, whether in this case, our AWS for this one scenario is going to be able to provide us with sufficient evidence, and I will see how much of that determination I can share back with us. But I guess wanted to explain that these are not just documents that were published to hear ourselves speak. There will be, in fact, action on the ground that results from these to help and better understand how our risk posture changes and how we can prove this to ourselves and to regulators. Okay, so another possible application might be in the payment card industry. If we can, so if you're the way the regulations read, if we can sandbox the payment card, like certain payment card processing data, it actually reduces audit scope for us. So again, this is a clear usage of the technology, regardless of cloud provider. And again, we'll be looking at the control estate and how it is impacted by this change. So this is goodness from where I'm sitting. Now we have some additional work in the governance patterns business that we should probably go over. But what I wanted to do right now is for us to do a quick scan over this list. I think this is really all there is right now, and see if it can be augmented, if there is anything that we can basically say has been done. So I believe like this is done. So I mean, published or about to be published. Now load governance, workload up, update governance, verifier governance. So this is goodness. The remaining patterns, reverse proxy. I want to talk about it. Maybe if we have time left today, I would like to have certainly a discussion on where that stands. It is somewhat behind or blocked behind TWI, but doesn't necessarily have to be. So I want to go over that. AIML is super interesting, especially with agentic, and we can definitely make some progress around that. I certainly want to understand governance around exceptional access and shell access. So especially we have confidential VMs. Like we've traditionally, I think, forget in confidential computing that our workloads can be very, very large. Right, and when something is large, it's very, very hard to control extensibility and sort of the transitive closure of all things that the workload might do. And the moment you add interactive admin logon, for instance, like shell access, it's almost as if all bets are off. And I want to understand what we can say in that space. I believe it warrants closer examination. By the way,
can I just sorry?
Yeah.
Just to comment on that, this thing about workloads being large. I mean, the whole VM, confidential VM, where people think of VMs as entire virtual machines rather than a cut down virtual machine where you understand the TCB, is for me a somewhat worrying move. I see why it makes sense from a legacy workload point of view, but it certainly doesn't make sense from a security and TCB lockdown point of view. And I think there are two.
Okay, can you say that again? Can you say that again? Because I stopped following. Something didn't make sense. Can you rewind 15 seconds?
So the move, when people talk about confidential VMs, they tend to mean an entire OS inside a TE.
Yes, yes.
But it doesn't need to be, right? So for NARCs, for instance, takes a completely different approach to that, where we had a microkernel and a WebAssembly runtime and a lot of control as to what was run. So we had a very small and carefully controlled TCB. So it worries me that people assume that this is the right way to do it, where it is one way of doing it, which fits the legacy use case. I absolutely get that. But I wouldn't want us to be designing ourselves into corners where there are opportunities actually to do a much better job in terms of controlling the TCB. So that's my first point. Is that clear now? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I just want to speak to it real briefly. So a very locked down CVM is a special case of a wide open CVM. And I think we can talk about wide open CVM and then include what you just said as a special case as perhaps best practice.
I think there can be quantitative differences, and I think there are two areas where those differences can be quantitative. One is if you ban dynamic loading of code, and it is possible, but it's not possible in a standard Linux VM, or it's almost impossible. And the other is if you also ban interactive input post attestation, which includes
input
like
interactive host attestation. Sorry, I don't understand what that means.
Okay, so if you complete your attestation and verification and you're happy with the policy,
yes,
one of the policies may be that you'd have no further input. It's everything from there is output. In that case, it may be possible, although the Church-Turing hypothesis makes it difficult to prove, difficult to prove, to control in a deterministic way what the activities of that TE and its workload are. I think if you don't specify those, it is impossible to do that, because your TCB cannot be controlled, because it can always be added to if you allow those two things, I think.
So, right. So a couple of thoughts on that, and we'll probably need to come back to this, because this is, to me, that's a evidence that we need focused attention on exactly what it is that we can say and what it is that customers need to hear about, the expectations. So I am very worried, generally speaking, about overpromising what any security technology does, because that results in severe damages sometimes.
Yep.
And when people say, well, we protect our data in use, and then they start a confidential VM, and that confidential VM ends up running some sort of malware that just there because there is some overrun and otherwise signed code, or any myriad other reasons, that policy, whatever. They may find that their keys are leaked, the data is exfiltrated, and what they thought was the protection a T offers is from a hostile external actor, but it doesn't offer effectively any protection from the hostile shielded actor that's already the fox in the hen house type of thing. And we on this call, we understand this, but
well, you can design a system which does give you the protections, but it is rarely done.
Right. And and I think if CVMs become the predominant mode of operation, right, like containers are a little easier to deal with, because containers are
really.
Yeah, I think
you get
so.
a whole bunch of other shit going on. Sorry, a whole bunch of other problems going on.
Well, maybe we would need a security considerations document around that too. But at least containers, I can wrap my mind around, because it's a usable process. I can, properly or sufficiently secure the kernel, and then I can basically share that kernel, and every process gets.
Well, but the problem is that you have the control plane is wide open in most use cases.
Okay.
People
so
are working
again,
around that. But,
all of that, we need to develop all that content, because again, if you don't understand what it is you got, you can't govern it. Like that understanding is a prerequisite.
Yep.
I believe that's missing, and this is where a lot of governance frameworks out there don't really do that homework, and I believe we need to do better if we're going to deliver on promises. So anyway, so there is exceptional access, shell access, and extensibility. We will need to figure out what that means. Let's come back to that. The second one is, well, the C is easy. Like we need to understand what the list is. Once we get the list, then some of it we're going to get done by 2025. So I think there is very little contention on this first item in this list, right? So let's move on. Then there is this whole CSA CCM. So that project is under development, and this is actually stale. So I just want to put the IAM domain equating human and non-human identities. I think that's a field really worth paying attention to, and agentic AI is a big part of it. And so IAM domain. So it was actually my contribution to CCM 4.1, where I basically said you really need to you need to govern them similarly, and this was a bit of a Trojan horse that I put in, open source Trojan horse. I was open about it. But the idea is, if you start governing human and non-human identities similarly, then confidential computing actually gives you a fantastic way of speaking about non-human identities, because you actually do some measurements around what's actually in there. So And I believe that I need to understand where they are with respect to implementation guidelines, because they've developed the controls domains control specifications that's been updated, but the implementation guidelines have not been. So that's another area where we can contribute. I think this needs to be done under the joint working group that we have with CSA, which again has been dormant over the summer, but I imagine it's going to come back to life.
I was going to ask whether that's likely to re-emerge. I'm glad to hear that it's late.
It's been very slow. We had to cancel a bunch of meetings, but again, it's summer. This and other priorities, but it's going to come back. All right. Yep. So this one I feel heartburn over. Identity governance and confidential workloads, and this is where I'm saying even reverse proxy is behind the trustworthy workload identity SIG. So Mike, you were in the TWI call yesterday. So remember, so Hank is very much a friendly. Hank, Dan, if you don't remember,
yep.
Hank Burkholz, he is the RATS work group chair, I believe, in IETF. And when I pressed him and basically saying, you may have many use cases, but you have this one very important use case where your workload needs to get an identity that, an identity and corresponding credential that will work with relying parties that don't like to change, right? So the key construction in RATS, which is the EAT, what is it? The attestation token. What is E for? That's for anyway. The entity attestation token. That is very much breadboard type construction. It has like boot counts on it. It has a bunch of stuff. It does not yield itself to stable relying party policies. And yet, it's being pitched as something you can present to a relying party. Maybe in some cases you can. I'm not saying it's never useful, but in the enterprise software world, it's simply not the case. So I wrote up a business case. And I basically said, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Please explain to me how it can be done using RATS. And my recommendation to Hank has been, again, Dan, you weren't on the call. Mike was, but I'll refresh your memory anyway. That you should do impedance match of RATS with Whimsy. So that's two IETF working groups that should work together. And you should also explain how RATS, perhaps with a separate draft or separate RFC, how RATS work with identity providers, both issuing tokens and those issuing certificates. I believe that's missing. But if you remember, it's a little bit like pulling teeth with Hank. Didn't you sense that?
Well, I think he's got somewhat different priorities and coming from a different direction. I mean, I think that what you suggested is important, so I think it needs to be done. So,
yeah. So we'll and again, maybe this is the TWI's contribution to RATS, but I'm a little reluctant to do it that way because I feel like a bull in china shop in his world, because they have their own philosophy, and maybe there is another way of keeping their philosophy and addressing this business case that I'm not thinking of, right? So, but this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I'll keep pushing on that. But that's really where I'm talking about identity governance and confidential workloads. This is what I mean. It's really, this is what I wanted to say. So this is done. Let me actually put things like done. We have this trustworthy identity. That helps. This is done. Coordinate among Whimsy and RATS working groups to push for, and I'll call these things impedance matches. And also have RATS explain how they connect, how they work with identity providers. So that's, again, this is a to-do, and this is something that we will, but this is more of a twice SIG. See, I don't know if this is governance. I don't know if this is like done here, but once that's done, then maybe we can do something around governance. Okay, we also talked about, this is important. shared responsibility model around confidential computing. At some point in time, we need to say who's responsible for what. So Dan, Mike, are you aware of existing efforts in this area?
What do you mean by shared responsibility model?
So shared responsibility model is effectively a form of a contractual agreement that a customer of a computing service has with the provider of compute, right? So you can so there is a SRM is a document that's published individually by each, say, cloud service provider. So AWS has its own, Google has its own, Microsoft has its own. And they will say, we will provide the following things. We're responsible for the following things. You, the customer, are responsible for the following things. So for instance, they may say, we will ensure that content in the S3 bucket is backed up, right? You, the customer, are responsible for the fact that you don't put junk in there, and that your malware doesn't destroy, what stuff that we back up before we back it up, like things like that. But there is a clear understanding and separation of responsibilities. What it is that you expect your cloud service provider to do, and what is it that you expect to accomplish. And I believe I believe, and that I may be wrong on this, that the understanding around confidential computing, certainly by customers, this SRM, is probably lacking.
So I can think of at least 3 different sections to such a model or a contract, or call it what you will. The first one is around availability, which is difficult because it's the one thing. Well, I think important. Let's say not difficult, because it's the one thing in the CIA triad that confidential computing can't help with. Right? It can provide confidentiality and integrity assurances, but it can't provide any availability assurances. I think availability is a very important one to do, and I would include.
But confidential computing can't really help you there at all, can it?
Well, exactly, yeah. So it's important, therefore, that if you do have an agreement around confidential computing services, that there is a service level rather than technology level agreement around availability, right? So the next one is around, I'm going to say broadly, TCB, in terms of what the cloud service provider provides and puts into, let's say, a CVM or a confidential container, and the levels of audit or openness or reproducibility of builds or whatever around all of those. And the third is around attestation and similar types of assurances that may include things like location, if you care about that. So these are all separate areas where I think having a clear delineation in terms of what is expected by the customer and what is expected by the CSP in the broadest sense would be extremely useful. Do those make sense to you?
Yes, and I would suggest that you perhaps start writing them down, maybe as a separate document, and then we can take it on. And it sounds like everything you just said will fit into 3 paragraphs. Should not be a big lift. But this is exactly the type of discussion and content I'd like us to start discussing and agreeing on and publishing. Because again, having an agreement on expectations is absolutely essential.
Okay, I will try and get something down immediately after this and share it with you guys and on Slack, whatever.
One of the most important pieces of advice I received in the last few months was that inspiration is perishable. So if you feel like an urge to work on something, do it right then and there.
It's not so much inspiration. This is stuff that's been in my head on and off, but it's never had occasion to put it down specifically in this context, and so I'll do it while I can, which is fine.
Yeah. Okay. So also there is this. So you talked about availability. Here's an important area of availability that's been actually bugging me for some time. Rollback attacks on storage. It is really, really hard, certainly with the knowledge I have, to prevent confidential computing from working on stale data. And if you work on stale data, you're going to you're going to have security vulnerabilities, pure and simple. And it's, normally in a very limited number of cases, you can handle it via like monotonic counters, but they don't really work very well. They don't really scale very well. I do not know how to deal with things like migration, and it may end up being that we will just have to say this is a risk you still accept, and maybe suggest a list of mitigations. But I believe we need to have.
Give me an example of the sort of thing you're worried about.
So if you load up, so let's just take a simple example. Let's just take a case where the confidential workload, produces a sum of all the inputs given to it. And then it needs to stop, cache some data, and come back at some point later time, to continue its work. So whatever data it has cached to say this is where I'm at, next time it starts up, who is to say that it's not being fed a stale thing from a previous cache?
And how do we think this is different to standard computing models? How is this? I'm not quite sure how this is a
so the
computing
difference
problem.
is in the standard computing model, you trust your storage provider to not attack you, and on the confidential computing, they may in fact.
No, I don't. Absolutely not.
Well,
I mean, if you
choice.
care about if you care about your storage, you have to do things like encryption. But
encryption doesn't help there either.
Well, it depends how you manage your keys, right? It can absolutely help.
If you rotate your keys, but the point is you'll need
rotation. But okay.
Yeah, you will need to find. You'll need to consider mitigations. The point is you can't just assume you're not under attack when it comes to storage.
Same goes for network, though. I don't, anything outside your TCP is untrusted, and therefore it is worthy of being assumed to be hostile. So, that's my view of any type of computing. If it's outside my TCP, now at least you have a fairly well controlled TCP in the case of confidential computing, if you've done it right. Although, as I've already discussed on this call, I don't think most people do. So I don't think there's anything new here. I think we should flag that that any input or interactions outside the TCP and outside the isolation boundary specifically, isolation boundary, because TCP assumes a point in time. So anything that is outside your isolation boundary and therefore outside your trust boundary needs to be regarded with considerable suspicion at all times. And that's the same for storage, it's same for networking, it's same for other inputs such as location and time.
Right.
And
so,
I don't think.
But let me just ask you sort of a high-level question here. Do you believe that our discussion of the SRM should include discussion of rollback attacks or not?
Well, I don't think what you've talked about is a rollback attack. I think you're talking about acting on data twice, but it's not an attack on the actual workload. So I don't consider that a rollback attack specifically. Could I craft rollback attacks using this particular property that I'm concerned about? Absolutely. It's not the only way I could do it, but yes. I don't think it needs calling out specifically. But I could be wrong, right? I may just not have understood or not thought broadly enough.
Then what do you think?
I think there's something there for rollbacks. I know with SGX, there were specific protections in place for rollback with storage because you had sealing as a property. And so if you tried to roll back storage, there was a monotonic counter within the SGX implementation.
SGX also does paging, right? So SGX needs to put data in memory and then put it back in. And if you're not careful, what you page out is not going to be what you page back in.
Yeah, and I haven't thought about that one recently, so I don't have any immediate thoughts on paging, but definitely
And something
for storage,
tells me, and I vaguely remember that in the way SGX does paging, it actually does keep track of effective monotonic counter of every page.
So that's not a
I don't
storage
remember
problem,
the
though, right?
specifics.
That's an
Oh,
execution
of course it
problem
is.
down to implementation.
Of course, it's cache. Whenever you cache memory outside of yourself.
Yeah, that might be stretching things just a little bit because you have page tables that are part of the architecture.
It's a storage-related implementation issue, but it's not something you need to worry about. It's not a generalized storage concern, I don't think. Anyway, I think we should continue having more discussions on this if we maybe want to carry on down our list. But I think this is it is worthy of further discussion, and I'll be making some statements in this document, which is going to turn into a 3-page to 10-page document as soon as I start writing it, because I know how these things work, and I'll try and think about rollback.
Yeah. Okay, so and the last one is the one that I have the most heartburn about. Actually, this one's a little less. So are you familiar with this MITRE effort called Threat-Informed Defense?
Not sure. Is that we had Mari come in? Was Mari involved in that? Was that separate?
Mari was involved, but not in this specific capacity.
Okay, right.
So
I don't think I know about it then.
Industry, so MITRE Threat-Informed Defense is interesting, and I want to see. Like I'm actually a little behind on it, but I've been in their meetings, and they're not, as far as I'm concerned, doing God's work. They're like, instead of just do a blank sprinkling of controls and everything, let's actually understand what it is these controls are supposed to do to protect us, right? Threat-Informed Defense
sounds like a good thing. Yes. Agreed.
Yes. So I want to. I'm. It's also pretty well connected with my regular full-time job.
So this one also dovetails with a topic that I wanted to talk about today, which is like, what are our actual priorities for compliance frameworks? And one thing that brought this to mind for me as I was doing some study on Ubuntu security features, and there's grab the page. So as part of their, I think, pro offerings, they have a number of these frameworks here that they've presumably there's demand for these. So the like FIPS, DISA STIG, CIS, CRA. So I wonder if that is a good priority list. If there's other priority lists out there, but like we want to like attach to the demand for existing compliance frameworks so that we pull through confidential computing with those.
Yes, and this has been a challenge for us from the beginning. So, and by the way, this list here is not a prioritized list. This is just an ordered list, but it's not not in any order of priority. It's just so I can refer to things, not bullet 3, bullet 4. But the discussion worth having, I believe, is what should we tackle next, and we will need to drum up the interest in the SIG so that people do join and contribute content and contribute to discussions, which again I'll maybe mention in the TAC next time we meet. But before we do that, I really want to have a clear set of next things to be working on that people can get behind. So to that, I'm looking to you to perhaps advise me. Is there anything missing from this list, and what sounds like the most pressing thing to do next?
Yeah, I guess just what I said, that we want to make sure that we're relevant to the compliance frameworks that are driving purchasing decisions right now. And
Yeah.
I'm certainly no expert in what those should be, but just using Canonical here as a proxy, they have prioritized these, I don't know, 15 or so that are on that link that I put out.
So there's a comment in the meeting yesterday that you brought up, Mark, which I don't think was intended as an attack in any sense. That was that you've been driving things to your priorities, and I think that's entirely appropriate, because I think that we can. There's kind of two ways to do this. One, we can look only externally and say, well, these are the three most popular things that people care about, and then try and fix those, right? Or we can do the opposite and say, well, here are the people who are driving the work, and here are the things they care about, and we should concentrate on those. Or you can try to find somewhere vaguely in the middle. The problem with the first one is that if you don't have people driving it who care about it, it's not going to happen. And in fact, right, I'm very much in favor of a particular agenda being pushed, because it means work will get done. And it also means that likely some people say, well, that's not my agenda, to which the answer is, well, you get involved as well, which, I think has happened to some degree. So well done. I mean, hugely, lots of respect for that. So I think that, yes, I agree, Dan. I think the danger with saying these are the three most important things, unless we can hang them on the priorities of specific members, then we won't get work done. And so I think finding the overlap, basically doing a Venn diagram, saying, well, these are the most important things, and these are the things that people care about. What's the overlap? Let's concentrate on those, is a pretty good way of doing things to start with. Yeah.
Okay, but how? All right. So help me perhaps arrive at a prioritized list. I mean, it doesn't even have to be perfect. If we get something done that's pretty, high on the priority list, that's better than not.
So there is work going on at the moment at the GB level to prioritize.
What's GB?
Governing board.
Governing board.
To prioritize what sectors and what personae we should be going after, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of those is governmental, another is chief risk officer, CISO, whatever type of things in large enterprises, and another one is sort of defense, for instance. And I think that if we choose one now, and then we end up, let's say we chose FedRAMP, and we end up saying, well, actually, we don't care about government so much as we do about European enterprises, then we're going to find that we're misdirecting effort. So I think we should probably be choosing based, at least in part, on what comes out of that discussion. That makes sense?
Oh, okay. When are these discussions taking place, and how soon can we have output of that fed into this
some
process?
of them are going to be taking place at the GB in a week and a half time. And if JPMC wants to be part of those, you can, of course, sign up as a premium member. We'd be very happy to have you. Sorry, that's me.
No, I hear you. Yeah.
No,
well,
but obviously,
look, yeah. On
that's fine. No, that was cheap.
No, that's fine. We just felt that we wanted to participate and we want to contribute, like basically,
and that's
but
I'm
it's not necessarily important for us to have voting rights.
No, I get it. So I think that the point is that those conversations are happening kind of fairly soon. If we think that they are going to hold up the decision making that we need to be doing now in terms of priorities, then we should pick some and say to the GB, do these make sense to you via the tag? And that's fine. So, if there's one which we think is overriding, well, let's suggest we start with that. I think that's entirely appropriate.
Yeah. Well, I'm leaving. I would like to leave the priorities, the tastes and decisions to you guys, actually, because sort of you're running the consortium. I'm contributing, and I'm happy to follow your lead on, because look, in the absence of your lead, I will do things where my heart lies, and that is not business driven. That's emotion driven.
I don't believe that's entirely true. I think actually you're very consultative. You're very good at that, Mark, despite saying you're not. So we need to have a mix of these things, right? Because when it comes down to it, there's only so much work I can do. It's really the members who have to do the work. And so we need to find things which are going to be relevant to the members and relevant to the industry. So Dan, I mean, what would you put as your top 3 things to be looking at? I mean, feel free to use the Ubuntu list if you want, or whatever else really. But where would you start?
Yeah, I guess one thing we could do is put that Ubuntu list up in front of the board and ask for feedback for which of those they have business interest in or established business, either lines of business or some other sort of business dependency on, and see if we can use that as a way to solicit direct contributions from them to those frameworks.
Yeah, I think we'll be lucky if that happens, but we can
right.
try.
I think we know that we don't get a lot of direct feedback from the board, so it's a little bit of a catch-22 of like, we're having trouble getting direct contribution. At the same time, we need to come up with priorities, and you can't ask for one without the other. So, my sense, though, is that we just might be missing the boat on the compliance work if we aren't targeting the compliance frameworks that have existing business dependencies here.
Yeah,
lines of business.
I agree.
All right. So, what can I do? What can I do immediately? So we're gonna meet again. Probably not in 2 weeks, but in 4 weeks, because again, I'm not here in 2 weeks. I just can't imagine the meeting will take place without me at this point. But what are the next, or at least maybe between now and, or in the end of this month, you can help me suggest what the GRC SIG should be focused on next. Because I will take some default action without it. I just don't know if that's how my preference.
Well, I mean, I thought we were talking specifically about what sort of standards and stuff we should be looking at in terms of that. I mean, I think there's a number of things that we should be, we can do. Getting out the shared responsibility model certainly is a good piece of work we can get our teeth into, and that makes a lot of sense. Working with the CSA, trying to get that going further makes a lot of sense as well. I put something out to the attestation SIG this morning around naming of measurements and stuff, attestation measurements, and I think getting some thoughts from the GRC's point of view, SIG's point of view on that would be useful as well, because it may be that it matters in different ways to the people who care about GRC than it does to just your standard attestation person, for instance. I can see you caring about it, Mark, for instance. So, I think that's a few things to be getting on with, at least for now. I wouldn't worry about not having stuff to do.
Oh, no, I'm
go ahead. Yeah, just as far as like a goal for maybe the next time that we get together, if you want to look at this from a JP Morgan perspective, that list of things from Ubuntu, and think, which of these does JP Morgan include in its purchase decision criteria when it's looking for software products or outsourcing workloads to the cloud.
Yeah.
Another thing I'd like to ask, which is not specifically related to GRC but is related to JPMC, is do you have any interest in using any of the CCC's open source projects? If not, why not? And are there any gaps that if we did have something in that area, JPMC would start paying attention to them?
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of an off-the-cuff answer.
Sure.
I do not believe we're at a place yet where our developers are going to download an open source package and start putting stuff on top of it.
Is that because JPMC doesn't do that?
Because the number of scenarios is fairly small just yet. We're just getting our feet wet. And because of that, the kinds of things we might adopt. So let's take a look at a couple of things we are looking at. So one is key management in AWS Nitro, and the other one is reducing scope for audit in payment processing type of thing. We will take something that exhibits a degree of maturity that we can grab off the shelf and deal with. So Nitro is a good example of that. That for all its shortcomings,
it's quite mature as well.
Yeah, it's easier to adopt. It's fairly easy for us to build an architecture around. It's really no different than most other AWS services, right? So Nitro is not significantly more difficult to adopt than I don't know, Route 53 or there is a Terraform thing, right? Now, the other problem with taking on an open source project, it really does need to connect to outside services like verifiers and so you need to think about not just okay, I downloaded this open source package, I went and extended it or did something with it, but the end to end of it. How do I manage it? How do I govern it? How do I install it? How do I update it? How do I all of that stuff, right? So it's not going to be just do this one thing and it will be easier for you to adopt this or that project, right? It needs
You're looking
to
for something
be,
which is basically being productized to at least some degree.
We're looking for solutions, not building blocks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great set of answers.
Sorry, speaking of verifiers, I was wondering if we could talk through the feedback that you had on this PR 309.
Okay, can I pull it up just once real quick?
Yeah.
I see. You can expect that my cache is limited and this has been flushed.
Yeah. No, this is from a while ago, which is why I wanted to grab you face to face here. The gist of this was that I think it was some of the ARM reviewers on the initial draft said, hey, well, what about reference values? And we didn't want to incorporate those because that was sort of a lower level detail. But we wanted to say, hey, if you're going to go get a verification service from Intel or Microsoft, you expect that they are keeping this reference value information up to date. This is an expectation that you have of that verifier service.
Yeah, I have to refresh my memory on this, but this is what I sort of off the cuff remember. So there's a couple of ways of skinning this cat. And because we're really talking, and this is where Rat's architecture is not really talking about multi-tenancy, right? It's whether good or bad, that's where it's at. You have reference values related to the hardware, and you have reference values related to the workload. So, okay, I now remember what I said about that. And you can imagine one situation in which there is a verifier service provided by a cloud that manages the hardware, and all the reference values around what constitutes good hardware is handled by the verifier service. And
Yeah.
then a customer deploys a workload on that hardware and is responsible for reference values for the verifier tenant. That's clearly one model, and I think that's the one. If I trust Microsoft to provide the verifier service and manage the hardware, then that's the model. The other model, granted probably less prevalent today, is there is a, I don't really trust my, the owner of the hardware all that much. And I'm keeping my own eye on what the correct reference values for the verifier for the hardware is. And in that case, I expect them, this verifier service entity, to just stand up an isolated version of verifier tenant, and I will manage all the reference values within it. For hardware
That one seems
and
less
for,
likely.
I already said that, yes.
Yeah, it just seems like that's more of an exception, because like, what is that service then if it doesn't seem like it's providing any value? You're providing all of the reference values.
This is where I made if I remember, I was writing this down. Like, I'm not going to reread it all. I basically said, look, the verifier service is a little bit like hypervisor in that case. So it manages resources. It makes sure that I have storage. It makes sure I have compute. It makes sure I have network. It makes sure that I'm isolated from my peers. But it doesn't really look inside anything that I'm doing. And in fact, this can happen. This is one instance where this can happen. If I am hosting my workloads in Microsoft, but I don't trust Microsoft Verifier Service, and there is another verifier service stood up by another entity that I would rather use and be their tenant, and they may be servicing some customers from Microsoft, some customers from Google, or some tenants, and the reference values will be up to an individual. Now, it's much harder for the tenant to manage, much harder, of course, because then you need to keep track of what hardware is where. I just don't want to preclude that mode of operation, and for that,
that one just feels to me like you are operating your own service at that point, if you're the one responsible for going out and fetching data from NVIDIA and Intel and so forth.
Yes, right. So it's possible for us to thread that needle by explaining both modes and say we expect that majority of customers will fall into this one bucket, but pay attention to this other way of doing it. And this is, from the point of view of a generic document, I don't want to be calling winners and losers. So anyway, that was my reasoning. Now, agree with it or disagree with it, there are legitimate reasons to agree or disagree, of course.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that I wanted to add in one of those lines that I have there is that in the real world, what will happen is the CSPs do not want to cause an availability problem by rebooting their servers. So they will sit on patches until they feel like they have queued up enough work to justify telling their customers that they're going to reboot the machines. Meanwhile, they will continue to send out attestation results saying everything's up to date when they're really not up to date.
Yeah, and certainly for code, so I do not know about like how data centers are managed in that regard. But if there is a high priority, I do not know, like CSV 9.8 thing. What is it called? CVE 9.7 thing. We may have a contractual obligation to say these things you get patch, you patch them within 48 hours. And anything with CVE less than 9.0, but between 8 and 9, you patch within 2 weeks. And anything less than that, you can sit on, right? But certainly for code, we have standards around if it's a highly critical, like remote execution type of vulnerability, you patch it faster than if it isn't. And yeah, so the core of the kind of statement we need to make here is who is like, is it always the case that the verifier service is responsible for hardware reference values and the verifier tenant is responsible for, their own? I do not have a problem saying that's the predominant model.
So this plays in again. Sorry, to the slides I just put out this morning, because understanding what is being measured by whom and who owns what and who puts it in is all part of this discussion, right? So if you're taking a sort of, for instance, I believe that Ubuntu provides a thing whereby they will create a confidential VM with a version of Ubuntu in it, right? So everything from the OS through the UEFI is them, and then stuff outside that as well, right? So who owns that depends partly on who's put it in there, and that is a really important thing to understand and will vary between different use cases.
Yeah.
Okay, so just in terms of this being in the last 60 seconds here, yeah. If I incorporate the word predominant in here, are you good with the changes?
I think so. Yeah, I don't want to preclude any particular mode of operation. And I am also completely recognizing that normally the verifier service is the one that's going to be probably more oriented towards reference values for the hardware, and the verifier tenant is mostly. And then the case that Mike puts out where, okay, this is my Ubuntu VM. Well, it's probably my CVM image still. It has nothing to do with what hardware it's running on. So it's probably still closer to verifier tenant, right? Although, again, the CSP may say, this is a blessed Ubuntu image for you to run with your confidential VM.
As they do at the moment.
Right, and the thing is, there is this fuzzy area, and I want to be very careful in how we phrase things, so we both steer people in the right direction and also don't preclude them from making different choices.
Yeah, and also I wouldn't want to tie us into a particular attestation model where the CSP is providing the main AVS. I'd like to see that as one of the options, and hopefully.
Yes, I believe in some cases that would become important.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've already started the doc. I will get something to you guys, all right?
Yes, and I guess, again, I will come back in 4 weeks to run the next one of these meetings. If between now and then you give me some sense of priorities, I'll be very happy. And, there is always the mailing list for us to have the conversations when we're not like online with each other.
Yeah.
So please utilize that. And I will ping the mailing list with our remaining 25 goals to also solicit people's ideas and priorities and see if anybody responds.
Cool.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Good one.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.